Welcome back to Insights into Teens. We are talking about fighting in school. So, we've talked about the impact on victims, we've talked about the impact on witnesses. What's the impact on parents? The aftermath of school violence triggers a spectrum of reactions among parents, revealing the intricate emotional landscape they navigate as they grapple with the safety and well being of their children. The reactions of parents to school violence are as diverse as the individuals themselves. This diversity stems from their personal beliefs, past experiences, and cultural values. These reactions provide a glimpse into the complex emotions parents experience when faced with the unsettling reality of school violence. In some instances, parents may inadvertently contribute to the cycle of violence. Misinterpreting aggression as strength, they might encourage their children to respond to bullying with similar behavior, like we talked about earlier. This misconception perpetuates a harmful cycle and fails to address the root causes of the violence.
Other parents, in an effort to protect their children, might attempt to teach them behaviors that they believe will prevent them from becoming targets of bullying or violence. However, this approach often proves futile and counterproductive. The child may internalize the idea that they are responsible for the violence they experience, leading to self-blame and emotional distress. In contrast, some parents adopt a proactive stance. They work closely with the school, collaborate with teachers and administrators, and challenge the system if necessary, all to create a safe environment for their children. These parents strive to empower their children by ensuring they can learn without fear.
So, what can we do to help prevent school violence? Every student deserves the fundamental right to learn in an environment that is safe, secure, and conducive to their growth. The encouraging news is that school violence is not an inevitable reality. It can be prevented through concerted efforts and strategic measures. The origins of school violence are complex and multifaceted, rooted in a multitude of factors, as we already discussed. Preventing its occurrence requires a comprehensive approach that addresses both risk factors that contribute to violence and protective factors that shield individuals from it. By understanding these dynamics, we can tailor interventions to effectively curtail the prevalence of violence. Preventing school violence demands the engagement of a diverse range of stakeholders. Teachers, administrators, parents, community members, and even students themselves all have a role in creating a safer school environment. Collaborative efforts leverage the strengths of each group and create a united front against violence.
Encouraging students to report any signs of violent behavior is essential. Many schools offer anonymous tip lines, providing a safe space for students to share their concerns without fear of retaliation. Children who witness or experience violence should be encouraged to speak up. The importance of open communication with trusted adults, such as parents, teachers, and counselors, cannot be overstated. Consistent reporting ensures that concerns are addressed promptly and effectively. Recognizing and reaching out to students who display signs of distress or aggression is crucial. By offering support and understanding, we can help them navigate their emotions and provide alternatives to violent behavior. Being vigilant about potential warning signs of violence is pivotal. These signs might include fascination with weapons, harming animals, bullying, threatening others, or displaying aggression. Recognizing and reporting these signals to parents, teachers, or school authorities enables early intervention, potentially diverting a child away from a violent path and towards a path of help and healing.
So I guess really the most important question that I can ask at this point is, do you feel that you have some course to remedy or some call to action in school that if you see violence or you are the victim of violence, that you can go to someone, report it somewhere, and have some level of confidence that someone's going to do something about it to help to make the environment safer?
I mean, for the most part, yeah. I'd say the school, does its best to counter the violence and such. They always try to make sure that there's teachers involved, or if they need to have any of the police around the school to also get involved to stop the violence. So if I was involved with it, or if I saw something happening, I do feel like I could go to certain teachers and know that they could, have my back.
Now, you're getting ready to go back to school next week. I think you start on Thursday. You've got 2 shortened days. Do you have any concerns for your own personal safety going back now, or do you think you're fairly safe going back at this point in time?
I mean, the concern's always there at this point. I kind of have that concern really going anywhere outside my own home, even if I'm not completely safe in my own home as well. But, it's just kind of going to be something I'll have to deal with. For the most part, my school's been all right with handling that. I've never personally had to experience too much violence. And while I don't have complete and utter guaranteed safety, for the most part, I'm not completely worried about that facet just yet.
I think that's, I don't want to say it's a healthy attitude, but I think it's a realistic attitude given everything that happens these days to kind of understand and appreciate the fact that nothing is 100% safe. So if nothing else, you don't let that generate anxiety, you let it generate awareness. So you're aware that things could potentially happen, and then you know what to do, how to act, where to go, where your safe spaces are. So as long as you have that understanding that things are not 100% safe, and I think it's a bad idea to try to portray that to students or anybody really. Everyone should be aware that, there's potentially violence that happens everywhere, and you just need to know how to handle it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that because, if we pretend that everything is safe or that everything is fine, we're not going to be prepared when something dangerous actually shows up. We're not going to, have any sort of preparations for it.
Right.
We're going to be freaking out a lot more at that point, and I wouldn't, let it completely generate anxiety to where, kids would refuse to even try going anywhere. I'd say make them aware of it, but also assure them that they have it under control. There's ways to prevent it. There's ways on how to deal with it if anything ever does come up, so that you don't have them to be completely ignorant or completely fearful.
Right, I agree. We're going to take a quick break, come back, get your closing thoughts, and finish up with the business of the podcast. We'll be right back.
Alrighty. Alright, so to everybody out there, I hope that this podcast kind of brought awareness to the real issues behind school violence so that we can at least get rid of the stereotypes that it's only certain factors that play a part in it and that it's more or less a one-sided issue. It's really not. It's a much more complex issue that, needs to be better understood. I feel, much like most topics when it comes to teenagers, there's plenty of misconceptions about it, and I feel if more people are able to be knowledgeable about it, we can help to fix it and hopefully prevent it in the future, much like giving better knowledge about how to handle school violence and not just saying everything's going to be fine or causing kids to panic.
All right. Wise words as always.
Thanks.
Before we go, once again, I want to subscribe to the podcast. For the record, I already do subscribe to the podcast, all of them. So everyone else should as well. You can get audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Teens. You can get audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google, etc., etc. I'd also invite you to connect to us on social media. We stream 5 days a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcasts, or you can find all that and more on our official website, at www.insightsintothings.com and you.
And don't forget to check out our other two podcasts, Insights and Entertainment, hosted by you and Mommy, and Insights into Tomorrow, hosted by you and my brother Sam.
That's it. Another one in the book.
Bye, everyone.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, episode 21. Is the Supreme Court broken? I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
How you doing today, Sam?
Doing okay, excited. We're getting back into the flow. This is what, like our third episode in a couple months?
Something like that, yeah.
Back on a roll.
Yeah, well, at least now when we do plugs on our other shows, I don't have Madison saying, well, you're not quite monthly podcast. You guys don't do monthly anymore. So at least now we're getting back into the flow of things. So today we're going to be talking about whether or not the Supreme Court is broken, with a series of landmark rulings from the Supreme Court, some of which were precedent-breaking, almost all in support of the current conservative agenda. Is the Supreme Court broken? Are 9 unelected justices, 3 of which were handpicked by probably the most controversial president in American history, dictating the direction of a government that is supposed to be a republic of the people? Well, that's what we're going to be discussing today on this episode of Insights into Tomorrow. But before we do that, I would like to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video versions and audio versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. And we're available on Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, any place you can get a podcast these days.
Rest in peace, Stitcher. They're shutting down.
Are they? I hadn't heard that. Oh, I got to take those off the list then.
Yeah.
Wow, they've been around a long time, too.
I used to use Stitcher, and then they changed their interface, and it was terrible, and then I stopped using Stitcher, and I think a lot of other people did, too.
Apparently a lot of other people did, too. You can also email us or reach out to us. Our email is comments@insightsintothings.com. We are on Twitter at @insights_things, or you can get links to all those and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Are we ready?
Let's get into it.
Here we go. So our first topic comes from New York Times, and they tell us that the recent Supreme Court term concluded with a series of 6-3 decisions divided along partisan lines, with the court's 6 Republican appointees in the majority. Those rulings on affirmative action, student loans, and gay rights were reminiscent of the transformative conservative decisions issued last June on abortion, guns, religion, and climate change. Is the Supreme Court in crisis? And if so, how could it be fixed? Complaints by the Supreme Court have cropped up throughout American history, but they've taken on renewed urgency since President Biden's inauguration. In the past, some of these criticisms have come from the left, such as when Franklin Roosevelt threatened to, quote, pack the courts to protect New Deal legislation. Others emerged from the right, like anger aimed at the, quote, activist bench that decided Roe v. Wade in 1973. But more recently, Democrats, stung by the Republican Senate majority's refusal to hold hearings on President Barack Obama's nominee Merrick Garland in 2016 and its replacement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg with Amy Coney Barrett just weeks before the 2020 presidential election, have reinvigorated calls for reform.
So is there a problem? Is there a problem with the nation's highest court? The appointment process has become more politicized than ever, like most things in this country, leading to dogmatic justices and a court whose legitimacy among the public could be in danger. In the past, it had not been the case that the public could look at these 9 people and see them projecting the ideological preferences of the political party that brought them to the bench. After Brown versus Board of Education, a case could be made that something changed in the American psyche. The idea that the court had, quote, final interpretive authority had been solidified in the public mind, and the, quote, perceived power of the Supreme Court in popular political culture vastly expanded. This shifted the debate to how to interpret the Constitution, which created an even bigger incentive for presidents to vet and select judicial candidates who would faithfully execute their agenda. So because of that, leaders began to choose nominees who were young enough to influence decision-making for decades after that president had left office. So you're seeing, they'll appoint a judge, but even after they've left the office, we're still seeing the ramifications of that appointment years after the fact. One effect we have today are judicial amendments to the Constitution, which with no ready means to overturn them. Of course, short of Congress actually cooperating to add new amendments to the Constitution that the justices would have to consider, of course. So, we're looking at what all this means, right? These judges have a ton of power, and, with this 6-3 Republican majority, how is that affecting a lot of these decisions?
Yeah, and without going into a civics lesson here, the purpose of a 3-part government with an executive, a judicial, and a legislative branch was to have separation of power. Mm-hmm. And at no point in time when that form of government was created was the intent to have Congress actually writing laws. So the problem that we run into now is that because Congress can literally interpret what the Constitution says, they can tell you now what those laws are. So even if a law says one thing, the Supreme Court can come in and rule against how it's actually written. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that you hear a lot about in the news is your Second Amendment right to bear arms. Well, one of the things that a lot of people who talk about this subject fail to mention is that in the Constitution, it says the right to bear arms is tied directly to militia. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court simply interpreted that as to not be the case anymore. And they decided that everyone should be able to bear arms, whether you're with a militia. Now, if you look at the history of militias, local militias, which everyone remembers the Minutemen and all that stuff that were the militia, they were evolved through legislative processes into what is today the modern National Guard. So when we say militia today, that equivalent is National Guard. Now, you could make a case that says only the National Guard, who are citizen soldiers, should have the right to bear arms, and it would make sense. But the court didn't interpret it that way, and the court says everyone should have the ability to bear arms.
Right.
We're seeing this now, and one of the things that we're seeing now is that the decisions that are being made along partisan lines. And the entire concept of the Supreme Court is that they're supposed to be impartial. They're appointed. They're not elected. Mm-hmm. And they could be appointed by either party, of which parties themselves technically are unconstitutional, since there's no concept of political parties in the Constitution that you can make an argument for right there. But the problem that we're running into now is you've got people that are on the court that are not necessarily making impartial decisions from what people are saying. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of tough to watch, honestly. Especially when you think about how you would like things to work we're not necessarily a straight up democracy. We're a republic or a democratic republic, right?
Federal republic.
Yeah. But in a certain extent, you would want the will of the people to be reflected by the people that are leading us. And I don't really think that's the case necessarily, especially when we are going to look at a lot of these rulings today. A lot of people don't agree with these rulings, but there really is nothing we can do about it because they're the Supreme Court and they hold all the power when it comes to these things. And especially when you've got the conservative majority, obviously a conservative agenda is going to be more pushed, than the other side of things. And there's just no getting around that.
Well, and the one point the article makes is that the only thing that Congress can do to take back the power that the people elected into them would be to come up with amendments to the Constitution. So the Supreme Court would then have to consider these amendments. Of course, they could rule any way they wanted on those amendments. But the problem you run into now is that the political environment is so contested, there's no way you're going to get both Republicans and Democrats to agree enough to get any kind of amendment passed. And to be honest with you, with the politicians we have today, I think the last thing this country needs is people starting to write amendments to the Constitution.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope.
So how do we get that power back into the hands of the people?
Oh, you're asking me? I have no idea. I mean, I legitimately have no idea because, like we talked about, these folks aren't elected; they're appointed. So I guess it would be voting for the political candidates that you think would appoint the judges you want. But even then, there's no guarantee that's going to happen. I don't know if there's a legal way to to contest it. I don't think there is. Right? It's the Supreme Court. I mean, you always go to that higher power. The highest power for law is the Supreme Court, right? So maybe at the state level.
Theoretically, the only thing that really could be done would be what the Republicans were concerned the Biden administration was going to do, and that is pack the courts. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing constitutionally that says the court is limited to 9 justices. We've had more in the past. So the president could call for the expansion of the Supreme Court, add, say, 3 additional people to the Supreme Court, appoint 3 Democrats, so you'd have
6 and 6.
6 and 6 at that point in time, and try to bring some balance back to it. That's feasible, and that's something that's well within his power, but the punishment of the attacks that he would get for packing the court like that from the Republicans, he'll be impeached within a week once he even mentions that.
But wouldn't you want it to be balanced? Is that not, wouldn't you want enough?
I would, as a citizen, I would.
But I guess if you want...
As a Republican,
right.
You don't when you have the power.
Yeah.
Because, if you look at history, whenever government power has been balanced, where the executive is one party and the legislature is another party,
nothing gets done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really, that's really the best scenario that we have at this point in time is gridlock. Because if neither side can get anything done, they can't screw things up any more than they already have.
Yep. Or further assert their own agenda and get more power for themselves.
That's it. And the problem that you have right now is that when you can appoint members to the Supreme Court that will carry out your agenda and not be impartial, that is packing the court, really.
Right.
And they did exactly that under Trump, where they rushed through the last appointment after Ginsburg died.
Yep.
And had she held out, and I don't mean to make light of this, but had she held out, because I think she was in a state of coma at the time, and they had just kept her on life support, they couldn't have filled that seat until after the election. And you would have had a more balanced, it still would have been imbalanced, but you would have had a more balanced court at that time. So
yeah.
I think the problem we have is the process by which justices are appointed is now ripe with corruption, and it has become a political process. And I think that the integrity of the Supreme Court has deteriorated to the point that you've got Supreme Court justices now that are under investigation for corruption themselves, where you've got Thomas, Clarence Thomas, who's under investigation for taking undeclared presents or undeclared gifts, basically bribes,
Right.
from a very prominent, very well-known Republican supporter that he was supposed to declare and didn't. And when you've got that kind of suspicion on your Supreme Court, it's really hard to take them seriously as being a Supreme Court at that point.
Yeah, because ideally, at the end of the day, we all know politicians are corrupt, right? I mean, everybody knows that. But ideally, you would want the last line of defense to be the Supreme Court, to be impartial, to be the one thing you can count on to kind of right the ship. But that is not the case anymore, and maybe it hasn't been for a while.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that's the problem we're at. That's the situation we're in now, where they were always the sanity check. They were always the ones that came in impartially. Not always. I mean, there was partiality in there for years, but they were the element of government that would come in that were the babysitters that would, push the two sides apart and say, all right, let's look at this. Let's look at what's legally precedent. Let's look at what's best for the country, and let's do the right thing. And you're just not getting that referee from them now.
Yep.
So I think we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at some of the more impactful decisions from the most recent term of the court. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. Today we are discussing the Supreme Court and some of their recent decisions. So the first thing we're going to cover is the ruling on affirmative action. The Supreme Court effectively gutted affirmative action, ending race-conscious admissions. In a historic decision, the U.S. Supreme Court recently, like we just said, ended race-conscious admission programs in colleges and universities across the country. In a decision divided along ideological lines, the 6 conservative justices, supermajority, that's a cool word, maybe not in practice, but it's a cool word, invalidated admission programs at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. The decision reverses decades of precedent upheld over the years by narrow Supreme Court majorities that included Republican-appointed justices. It also ends the ability of colleges and universities, public and private, to do what most say they still need to do, and that's consider race as one of the many factors in deciding which of the qualified applicants is to be admitted. So that's the first thing we're covering. This is a pretty big deal, especially for those that are affected by it. And it was really that public and private thing that I really latched onto, that it's everywhere. You think of the big schools, like it mentions Harvard and North Carolina, but this is going to affect a lot more than just them.
Yeah, and there's, with all things, there's 2 sides to every story here. And really what we're looking at here is you've got one side that basically says that you can't, by bringing race in and giving preferential treatment to one race over another is discrimination. So you can't do that. When the point of doing that was because discrimination existed already.
Right.
And you were getting preferential treatment to one race over another. So they legislatively forced you to, if not change that practice, then to at least adhere to certain percentages, certain quotas that you had to have. And the problem that you run into here is that you're saying, okay, let's do it away with discrimination administratively. Well, then in a perfect world, that works. You can do that. But we don't live in a perfect world, because when you do away with administrative discrimination, you still have endemic
Societal
yeah. discrimination that's going to take over in that place.
And that's kind of the thing, that when people argue that, they argue the first point that you said of, oh, well, it's discriminatory to have affirmative action. But then people forget that like racism exists, and like
Right.
that's why it had to be like forced in the first place, is because if we make it laissez-faire, it doesn't work. It's not equal, and it needs to be mandated to make it. Well, I guess it's not equal, but you know what I mean. To give those people the opportunity that they otherwise probably would not be afforded, and now will not be afforded.
Well, and I think that was what the original point of this legislation was. It was to force you to make it even. But in trying to get to that point, you simply instituted a different form of discrimination. So you're treating the symptom, not the problem. Mm-hmm. The problem really is the discrimination. And until human beings can evolve to the point that they don't discriminate, you're not gonna have that happy balance. And that's kind of what the majority have argued. The 6-3 majority, conservative majority in the court, argued, quote, many universities have for too long concluded, wrongly, that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. Now, I take exception to that one to begin with there, because our Constitution declares that all men are created equal. And when it was written, they knew all men weren't created equal, because also in the Constitution, 3/5, every African American who was in the country was counted as 3/5 of a person. So the hypocrisy in the Constitution itself tells me that we don't have a constitutional history that says this is intolerant.
Yeah.
As he has done before, Justice Thomas, the second black justice appointed to the court, reiterated his long-held view that affirmative action imposes a stigma on minorities. Now, this I think he has a point with. I don't think the way he puts it here has a point. He says, quote, while I'm painfully aware of the social and economic ravages which have befallen my race and all who suffer discrimination, I hold our enduring hope that this country will live up to its principles that all men are created equal, all equal citizens, and all must be treated equally before the law. Now, I think he's smart enough to know that that's not how the world is right now.
No, that's
The fact that he makes a statement like this is naive, and it's insulting, really, that he would make this
it puts
statement.
the ball in our court of like, hey, man, we got rid of it. You guys got to be better.
Right.
It's like, no, the Supreme Court exists to do that. It is your job, and more so part than like every citizen, to uphold these values and to fight for this kind of equality that you're talking about here. But you're not doing that. You're doing the opposite of that. And then you're basically washing your hands of it and saying, well, hey, we live in a society. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Now, to Thomas's point, I can understand the rationale that by holding African Americans to a lower standard, that you're imposing a stigma on them. And really, if it was me, I would be insulted. So really what we're talking about here is, if you have two people who are one white, one black, they both apply for school, you have to take, under normal circumstances, you would take the person who's the most qualified, and that qualification would be equally measured. But instead, what we're talking about here is somebody who may need a 3.5 grade point average if they were Caucasian to get in, an African American may only need a 3.25. And Thomas's point is, by holding them to that lower standard, you're basically telling them that they're not good enough. So there's a logic to it, But the way that he uses that logic is so distorted and so tone deaf to the spirit of this legislation, because what's happening is, in reality, you're saying, reality is saying, if the Caucasian has a 3.5 and the African American has a 3.5, we're going to let the Caucasian guy in because he's not black. And that's what reality is.
Yeah.
And Thomas fails to address that with his stigma argument. So Chief Justice Roberts goes on, and for his part, pointed out the court's 2003 decision reaffirming the constitutionality of affirmative action programs, noting that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, writing for the court at the time, had suggested that there would have to be an end at some point in the future. And Roberts declares that time is now. And I think the problem is, it hasn't. Human beings...
It's only gotten worse.
Not even human beings. Americans have not gotten to the point that they're mature enough to assume, to understand that all men are created equal. With the amount of legislation that's happening today that is discriminatory, that is holding African Americans down, that's holding Asian Americans down, the hatred that is an upswelling of political force in this country today is a clear indicator that not only are we not ready, we're not moving in the right direction, we're sliding backwards from where we need to be.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be something we say a lot on this episode. It feels like we're regressing.
Yeah,
and I think it is absurd to assume that the time is now is when we need to end affirmative action. If anything, we might need to go the other way with it to make it more affirmative, right? Because things seem to be only getting worse, and that's going to be a common theme here. We also have the opposing view, and this is from Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She said that the court subverts the constitutional guarantee of equal protection by further entrenching racial inequality in education, the very foundation of our democratic government and pluralistic society. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the court's first black female justice, also chimed in saying, with Let Them Eat Cake obliviousness today, the majority pulls the ripcord and announces colorblindness for all by legal fiat. Sorry. When you're quoting Supreme Court justices, they're much smarter than I am. But deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life, which is exactly what we just talked about. Just because you say it's that idea of like a post-racial America, right? Like we elected Obama, racism's over. It's like, no, it's not.
Right.
And that is clearly being reflected here as well.
Yeah, no, and the problem that we run into here is that what the majority are arguing here is they're arguing the point of a fiction. That in a perfect world, we shouldn't need this legislation. And they're right. In a perfect world, we shouldn't. The world we live in is far from perfect.
Yeah.
And this happened to be a stopgap measure to make things better. Nothing else has happened in this world to make that situation better. Mm-hmm. If anything, that situation's gotten worse. So by taking away some of the safeties that you've had in place to try to provide legal protections for people, you're doing your part. You're being part of the problem, not part of the solution at that point.
Yeah, why did they do this? just to have a rule? Like, what was the motivation behind it? I don't even like.
Well, the motivation is what motivates conservatives to want to do things like this.
Yeah, I guess just further the agenda, right?
Right. They're pushing an agenda, which they shouldn't be pushing an agenda. They should be looking at each and every case on a standalone basis and making educated, objective decisions. They should not be influenced by party politics, and that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I wonder if we'd have as harsh criticism if it was the other side, right? But I also think the liberal agenda or Democratic agenda is not as aggressive as the conservative agenda, and not as
which by its definition doesn't make sense.
Right.
That your conservatives are the more aggressive.
And that you're supposed to not like big government, right?
Exactly.
And this is the opposite of that. This is the biggest government.
Well, you could argue that this is a limitation of government because it's government making impositions over the schools. And they're saying, well, government shouldn't do that anymore. The schools need to regulate themselves.
I more so meant the 6-3 majority basically being able to do whatever it wants without being like stopped.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think
I see what you mean though.
the motivation that they have at this point in time is, we're a progressive Supreme Court now. We're going to do things right the way that we see it. We're going to make the changes that should have been made years ago, and they're going to undo what's being undone. And there's a couple of problems with that. One, you're undoing existing precedent. So by every time you undo a precedent, like they did in the last session when they overruled Roe versus Wade, every time you overrule a Supreme Court precedent, you delegitimize the Supreme Court.
Nope.
The whole point of the Supreme Court
It's the word. It's final.
is it's supreme.
Right.
Right. So when the Supreme Court can override the Supreme Court, then what the Supreme Court today, who's overriding that, says can be overridden.
Who watches the Watchmen?
Right. So they're delegitimizing the Supreme Court. So that's probably one of the biggest problems that you run into. The other problem is the things that haven't been ruled on, that really are important stuff that need to be ruled on, are being pushed to the side so that they can use this agenda that they have to rewrite the rules that have already been written. So you're hurting the country. Be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem.
And you talk about that correcting itself. So the Supreme Court overriding itself. It's like it really does. I didn't even think about that until just now. It really does have a very harmful effect because that basically could eliminate precedent in general. Because
Absolutely.
if they rule on now and then in 10 years there's different judges and they just are like, no, that's not. We're just gonna get rid of that. It's like, well, then what was even the point of doing it in the first place? It's like it's all temporary until you have a majority the other way that comes in and just does everything the other way. It does really delegitimize the whole process.
And that's what we've seen with political parties as well. One political party will come in and they'll be in power for 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, whatever, they control legislative and executive, and they'll push their agenda. And the other side will fight them tooth and nail. Then they'll switch powers and the balance changes. And then the other guys are fighting and nothing gets done. Nothing substantial gets done. We don't get universal health care. We don't get tax reform. We don't get any of the things that the country needs because they spend all the time fighting. Now, we expect that from our politicians. We don't expect that from our Supreme Court. We deserve better from our Supreme Court because these are appointed positions. They don't have to campaign. They don't have to get elected. They're not chosen by the people. They're handpicked. They're cherry-picked by the president, and it's for life. And they need to be held. They're not even held to the same standards, the same moral and ethical standards that lower courts are held to. There's no ethical board that oversees the Supreme Court. You would think instead of being the exception to the rule, the Supreme Court should be the precedent to the rule. They should be the ones that are under the most scrutiny. Their taxes should be looked at on a regular basis. Their gifts that they receive, their rulings that everything should be looked at. Their political affiliations, the friends that they take their vacation trips with, all of that stuff should be gone over with a fine-tooth comb on a constant basis because of the position they're in and the power that they possess.
Yeah.
It's dangerous that it's not, and it's dangerous that these people can possess more power than the elected officials in this country. That's really where the problem is. And it has a broader impact. This recent decision is likely to cause ripples throughout the country, and not just in higher education, but in selective primary and secondary schools. Ultimately, effects will be felt in every aspect of the nation's economic, educational, and social life. From the Rooney Rule that requires a minority applicant to be considered in all NFL coaching hiring decisions, to employment and promotion decisions, the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in schools and workplaces, and much more for Supreme. The questions that he was asked and how racially biased the people that were questioning him from the other side were, and that was Democrats questioning him at the time. It was brutal. And that was a small fraction of what he's had to put up with his whole life. Because he's a man who has set precedent his entire life with his career being African American, doing the things he did. You would think going through that and then making the statements that he said on this ruling, they were coming from two completely different people.
Yeah, like how do you even believe that when he says that?
Right.
Like,
It's astonishing what he's saying now and what he's been through in his life.
yeah.
So
And that was point number 1.
Yeah.
We've got 2 more to do.
that was rough. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about something that might be a little closer to you, and that is the student loan forgiveness plan being rejected. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. We are continuing our discussion on the Supreme Court's recent rulings. So in this segment, we're going to talk about the rejection of the student loan forgiveness plan. The Supreme Court effectively killed President Joe Biden's $400 billion plan to cancel or reduce federal student loan debts for millions of Americans. The 6-3 decision, we've heard that number a lot, with conservative justices in the majority, said the Biden administration overstepped its authority with the plan, and it left borrowers on the hook for repayments that are expected to resume in the fall. The court held that the administration needed Congress's endorsement before undertaking so costly a program. The majority rejected arguments that a bipartisan 2003 law dealing with national emergencies, known as the HEROES Act, gave Biden the power he claimed.
The president said he would work toward a new path for student debt relief using the Higher Education Act, which he called, quote, the best path that remains to provide as many borrowers as possible with debt relief. He also moved to create a, quote, on-ramp that would help ease the risk of default for students who fail to make payments when the current pause ends. Biden blamed Republican officials. Again, it's always the other guy's fault. Biden blamed Republican officials for causing the dispute that led to Friday's ruling, saying, quote, they had no problem with billions in pandemic relief loans to businesses, and those loans were forgiven. But when it came to providing relief for millions of hardworking Americans, they did everything in their power to stop it.
That's actually a pretty good quote from Biden.
Yeah.
I feel like we don't get a lot of those.
I'm sure it was written and somebody else wrote it.
Loan repayments will resume in October. Can't wait for that. Although interest will begin accruing in September. The interest is where they get you, by the way. The Education Department has announced payments have been on hold since the start of the coronavirus pandemic more than 3 years ago. Oh my God, where does the time go? The forgiveness program would have canceled $10,000 in student loan debt for those making less than $125,000 or households with less than $250,000 in income. 26 million people had applied for relief, including me, and 43 million would have been eligible, maybe me, the administration said. The cost was estimated at $400 billion over 30 years. Yeah, this is a heartbreaker. Let's really hoping this will go through. Obviously, I'm biased. I have student loan debt. And this $10,000 would have been a decent chunk of my loans that would have really helped me out. Now, I understand. I hear the argument, right? People are saying, well, you have to work to pay off your loans. But if you go watch, and I don't remember what episode it was, the episode where we talked about student debt, we talk about how the cost of college has gone up astronomically. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh, you have to work harder, right? And this usually comes from the older people, older generation of telling people my age, well, you just have to work hard. You have to, you need to stop buying your avocado toast so you can afford to buy a house one day, when it's really not that simple. Especially when interest, like I mentioned, the interest is where they're going to get you, because as the interest compounds and compounds on itself, I've heard so many stories of people that have been paying their loans for like 30 years and they still owe more than when they started because of the interest.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is another one of those situations where the proposed solution is treating the symptoms, not the problem. I totally agree that $10,000 off your loan would be really nice. But the problem isn't how much you borrowed. The problem is how student loans are structured. And in the episode that we had talked about student loan, the fact that it's predatory, number one, where these banks are coming after students knowing what the cost of college is and the potential for getting paid back over time, the banks are willing to wait for it, especially when they know they're going to take your debt and they're going to sell it to other companies and make money that way. And then these companies that sell it then get investors to invest in it. And the last thing these investors want you to do is pay your loan off. Yeah. What they want you to do is keep paying your interest, because that's how they get their money. The problem isn't necessarily students that borrow money to go to college. Part of the problem definitely is the cost of college, which has gone up unjustifiably. The other problem is these aren't traditional loans. These are credit cards, basically. If you went out and you bought a house, say you bought a house, we'll just use round numbers. You bought a house for $100,000 and you get 10% interest, which is like credit card interest on a house, by the way. But we're just doing it to illustrate.
Economics are hard.
So at the end of 30 years, you would have paid $10,000 in interest on that house. So your house would have cost you $110,000. That's it. The amount of interest that you're going to pay on that house is calculated the day that you get your loan. And it's a fixed amount. They amortize it over the course of the loan. And for the first 15 years, the majority of what you pay is going towards interest on that house, so the bank gets their money back. The bank is guaranteed to get their money back. After 15 years, the majority of the money is principal on the loan until you pay the loan off. By the time you get to the last 5 years on the loan, you're paying almost nothing in interest because the interest has already been paid back. But it's a fixed amount. If they structured student loans the same way, rather than charging you compound interest like a credit card, this problem would go away tomorrow. You would take out a $100,000 loan from the bank for your student loans. You'd pay your 10%, and the most you'd ever pay is $10,000 on that loan under that situation. And the problem of never-ending payments doesn't come into play. The problem of paying $100,000 more than the $100,000 that you were charged for your education goes out the window. That's what they should be concentrating on. They shouldn't be concentrating on trying to give you $10,000 towards your loan. That's not going to solve the problem. Because the problem is you owe that money to somebody, so the government's going to give you forgiveness. Well, the government has to pay that somewhere. So where's the government? The government's not a for-profit organization, right? They don't sell, lemonade. They don't have a lemonade stand somewhere where they're making money. The money comes from the taxpayers.
Right.
So their entire income is us. So if you're not paying your loan, someone's paying it, and it's the rest of the American taxpayer. And that's why it's very difficult to convince somebody who doesn't have student debt to pay for somebody who has student debt. What they should be doing is they should be changing the way the student loans are structured. They should be capping the interest payments on there. They should be capping how opportunistic these loans are.
And how easy they are to get.
Yes. If you did that, you could solve this problem. Until then, you're shining a turd here trying to make something pretty out of it.
Now, I will put on my tinfoil hat here. You mentioned that this really isn't fixing anything. But for people like me that are important for a Democratic president that may be running for re-election soon, this would be a great reason to get a vote for him, right?
Well, you are. And that's a good point. So he's buying your vote. That's right. Really what this is. The problem is that the demographic that you are the number of participating voters in that demographic are disproportionately smaller than the number of senior citizen voters, the ones who are going to be on the hook for paying that back. So that logic is valid, but the practice itself doesn't work because the numbers don't work out.
Yeah.
Because if you could get more people your age to get out and vote, it would work. But we can't. You know, the voting percentage of people in your demographic is like 15% or something like that.
I guarantee it's going to be even lower.
Right, where the voting percentage of people 65 and older is like 70%. So that's not going to work out in your favor, even if he is trying to buy your vote.
Yeah, you're not buying enough of the vote.
Right.
He should he should make it like an elder care bill or something.
Right, but if you fix the problem and you fixed how student loans were financed, it would work for because it won't cost the government anything at that point. You simply write legislation that says how you have to conduct your loans, and you then enforce that legislation. And people who don't abide by that legislation, you impose a fine on them, and the government has another source of income without paying for loans.
So why do we think what's stopping them from doing this restructuring? It seems pretty simple.
It is, but the problem is you have to get both parties to agree to it. And they can't agree to the color of the sky at this point.
Yeah, especially even if they want to, because it's from the other side, they're not going to do it.
Exactly. Joe Biden could propose legislation that would solve world peace and guarantee food on the table for every human being on the planet, and the Republicans would oppose it because a Democrat proposed it.
And they'd call it woke too, probably.
Right. And like it's not our responsibility to create world. You'd get stupid arguments like that.
Yeah.
When it's like, why can't these idiots just do what's right for the country and what's right for the citizens? They can't, because if it makes the other guy look good, then in turn it makes them look bad.
Right. When in reality it doesn't. It's we should all be in this together. We all live here.
Right.
But
I mean, you look at the parties now going into the primary, both parties are tearing at each other's throat, telling you why you shouldn't vote for the other guy of their own party.
Which is contributing to voter apathy, which is why people don't want to vote.
Exactly.
Maybe we'll make this another episode, but like I was always of the mind that you should always vote no matter what, and I'm really being convinced like maybe not. Like I don't know who we're gonna have in the presidential election coming up, but it's gonna be tough for me to like pick somebody, right? Like, and I know we go with the old lesser two evil arguments, but they're both pretty bad, or they both probably will be pretty bad. And I don't know. Like I said, we could make another episode, but it's the first time in my life since I've been able to vote, this will be my 5th year. Because I'm 23, I guess 24 by then, or 5. But yeah, it's really a struggle. It's like difficult, and I understand that voting is important and that you should always vote. But on the other hand, it's like I feel responsible for who I vote for.
And that's the thing. Most voters go out there. So there's a large chunk of voter that votes along party lines because their parents did, and they'll never change. And they're kind of locked in. There's a certain percentage of those. Then there's the kind of people who are easily swayed, the kind of people who hear one argument, don't do any research, and go do their thing. They're the uninformed voter. Then there's the informed voter. They're probably the smallest percentage out there. They're the ones the politicians are terrified of. Because if you're smart enough to go out and do your own research from multiple sources and draw your own conclusions, you terrify politicians. They want mindless lemmings out there that they can tell you who to vote for, and you'll just go do it. And if you vote along party lines, you're the ideal candidate. They don't have to say anything. They could go out there and kill people in the streets, and you'll still vote for them.
Yep.
That's what they hope for. And if you're informed, and the one thing that we try to do on all of our podcasts is to educate and inform people, enlighten people. Don't listen to what I'm telling you. Don't listen to what we say on the show. Go do your own research.
Yep.
If I'm wrong, come back and tell me that I'm wrong about something. I'm happy to hear that, and I'm willing to have my point of view changed if it's legitimate. But don't just vote. The politicians go out there, you have to vote. It's important. Go vote.
They guilt you into it.
Right. But, as a citizen, it's your job that's the one duty that you have is to vote. But what they're really saying is vote for me.
Right.
And voting is important because it's the only way that our kind of government continues to exist. So I totally advocate people vote. But when you're voting, if you're voting in your local election or your school board or something like that, understand the choice that you make affects you. You may not think who's in Congress affects you, but I'll guarantee you it does, because the amount of money you pay in taxes and the amount of money they take out of your pocket is something you can control by who you vote for. And if you vote somebody in this time and they don't do what you want, or you don't think that by the end of their term you're better off, or if you are worse off, vote the next guy in. And then vote the next guy in. Keep doing that until you teach them that you're in charge. The first thing the politician wants to do when they get into office is get reelected. That's their number one priority. It's not you. It's not their constituents. It's not the people that contribute to them. It's to get reelected. And they're never going to vote term limits on themselves. The highest office in the land has term limits. Politicians, Congress, Senate, they'll never do that. We have the power to do that. If you don't let incumbents get reelected, you're imposing term limits. And even if the guy gets in and you like him, vote him out. And vote the next guy out. And vote the next guy out. Don't let him get entrenched. Don't let him get in there. Don't let him create a power base or start to influence things or anything. That you've got people now, and I'm going off topic obviously here, but it's important to discuss. You had Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell gets up there the other day and does a presser, and something in his brain hits pause right in the middle of it. Now, I'm not saying this to be mean or facetious or anything. It was very clear the man had some kind of health issue at that moment. But they walked him off the stage and brought him back a little bit later after they did whatever they had to do to fix the wiring there so he could finish what he was saying, so he could pretend like he was still okay. And that was just so they could keep power. That's what they're doing. They did the same thing the same day Dianne Feinstein.
Was that where they told her to just say aye?
Just say aye.
Yeah.
Because she was completely oblivious as to what was going on because she was so far gone.
We see it with Biden all the time, too.
Yeah. And, you know, this isn't a crack on old people or mental illness or anything like that. But there comes a point when you're no longer effective at your job.
Right.
And when you get to that point, I used to unload tractor trailers for a living. And when I hurt my back, I couldn't do that anymore. So I knew I had to change careers. I had to go do something else that was not impactful to that. And I did. Had I kept doing it, I wouldn't be able to do my job and I'd get fired. You can't allow people to stay in power who can't do the job.
And unloading tractor trailers is much lower stakes than running the country.
That's true. That is true.
And that's the part that scares me is like you have these people that may not, and it's okay. You know, when people get to a certain age, you might not be all there.
Absolutely.
But that you shouldn't also still have the same amount of power as you did when you were fully lucid.
Right. You know, they talk about Reagan when he was in office, where he started having onsets of Alzheimer's. And do you really want someone who's suffering from a disease like that to have his finger on the nuclear button?
Yep.
Like, you have to do what is right. You have to have some moral sense of right and wrong to put your foot down in these times, or at least have the gumption and the class to step away and say, look, I can't do this anymore. I'm not up to it anymore. I can't do it the way that it needs to be done. Let a younger person come in and do this type of stuff. We as the voter have the power to do that.
The more you know.
Anyway, that's it for my soapbox for there. We're going to run over time here, but that's okay. We're going to come back with our last segment here and talk about religion, free speech, and gay rights. That should be a quick one. We'll be right back.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. We are still covering the Supreme Court's recent decisions after a brief aside.
Sidebar into politics.
Yeah, but we're back, and this is our last point for today. Religion, free speech, and gay rights. That's a lot, but we're going to do our best. The 6-3 decision, which turned on the court's interpretation of the First Amendment, appeared to suggest that the rights of LGBTQ people are on more vulnerable legal footing, particularly when they're at odds with claims of religious freedom. The ruling was the court's latest in favor of religious people and groups, notably conservative Christians. The Supreme Court sided on Friday with a web designer, recently. The Supreme Court sided recently with a web designer in Colorado who said she had a First Amendment right to refuse to design wedding websites for same-sex couples despite a state law that forbids discrimination against gay people.
Justice Neil Gorsuch, is that Gorsuch?
I have no idea.
I'm not very good
Neil.
with names. Neil. Justice Neil.
I'm sure he loves to be called that.
Writing for the majority in a 6-3 vote, said the First Amendment protected the designer, Lorie Smith, from being compelled to express views she opposed. Quote, 100 years ago, Miss Smith might have furnished her services using pen and paper. Those services are no less protected speech today because they're conveyed with a voice that resonates further than it could from any soapbox.
Yeah, I was reading the show notes before the show. What? I don't understand what that means. Like, what is he saying?
Basically, he's saying that because it's something that's being done on the internet and has a wider reach, it's no different than if it was a print material.
Okay, gotcha.
The case, though framed as a clash between free speech and gay rights, was the latest in a series of decisions in favor of religious people and groups, notably conservative Christians. At the same time, the ruling limited the ability of governments to enforce anti-discrimination laws. The justices split, surprisingly, along ideological lines, and the two sides appeared to talk past each other, kind of like politicians tend to do. The majority saw the decision as a victory that safeguarded the First Amendment right of artists to express themselves. The liberal justices viewed it as something else entirely, a dispute that threatened societal protections for gay rights and rolled back some recent progress. This also comes at a time when transgender people are facing increased discrimination at the local and national level, with the American Civil Liberties Union stating that there are currently 492 bills in the works around the country that would directly harm transgender individuals.
And this goes back to what we're talking about with this backsliding that we're feeling, right? This is another example of that. Using the Constitution as the weapon. In an impassioned dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor warned that the outcome signaled a return to a time when people of color and other minority groups faced open discrimination. It was the second time this week that the justice summarized her dissent from the bench, a rare move that signals deep disagreement. Appearing dismayed, Justice Sotomayor spoke for more than 20 minutes. Quote, "This case cannot be understood outside of the context in which it arises. In that context, the outcome is even more distressing. The LGBT rights movement has made historic strides, and I am proud of the role this court recently played in that history. Today, however, we are taking steps backwards." A Colorado law forbids discrimination against gay people by businesses open to the public, as well as statements announcing such discrimination. Ms. Smith, the woman who owned the website, who has said that her Christian faith requires her to turn away same-sex couples seeking website design services. I'm sure that's probably in the Bible. Jesus probably has a Squarespace page. Seeking website design services has not yet begun her wedding business, nor has she posted a proposed statement on her current website about her policy and beliefs for fear, she has said, of running afoul of the law. So she sued to challenge it, saying it violated her rights to free speech and the free exercise of religion.
So, you jumped on my point too quickly there. So, okay, first of all, there's nothing in the Bible that is anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ, Nothing like that. There are no teachings.
There's not? I thought there was.
Nothing.
I'm not even joking. I legitimately thought there was about like
Not
men.
a single mention.
Oh.
There are stories about same sex. There are instances of it occurring in there. Nothing is ever preached against. In fact, if you go by the teachings of Jesus, Jesus says to love all men, to love all people. So there's nothing in there. How the court could even use that as an excuse, number one. Number two, I'll guarantee you there's nothing about websites in the Bible, okay? Maybe the new King Charles Bible there might be, but there's nothing in the King James Bible or before it that has anything to do with it. So that's a falsehood.
And that makes sense why Justice Neal had that quote that he had, because you have to frame it so it's legitimate.
Right.
And not a bunch of baloney.
So, and the other problem that I have here is she's not being forced to express opinions that are contrary to her beliefs. She's being contracted to produce a website for someone else. If she didn't like fur coats and she made a website for someone selling fur coats, nobody would confuse her as being the person selling fur coats. Mm-hmm. So using that as logic for why you can't produce something for someone else is bogus. So there isn't a single argument in this case that has a leg to stand on.
It worked.
But somehow the conservative Supreme Court decided to latch onto this with as flimsy an argument as it was to set precedent again.
And to legalize discrimination.
And that's exactly what it is. That is how dangerous this Supreme Court is, and that is how broken this Supreme Court is that they took something that was so flimsy, it shouldn't have gotten past.
It's like a Judge Judy case.
Right. It shouldn't have gotten past TV court. Yeah. Okay. It was literally that weak of an argument. And somehow the Supreme Court decided that was important enough to listen to.
And to create such strong precedent.
Right.
Which makes you wonder that they could do it with anything, right? Like
the Supreme Court receives hundreds and hundreds of cases a year to hear. And they go through and they cherry pick the ones that they feel are the most important, the most impactful, and the ones that are the most influential on the Constitution. And they pick this steaming pile of crap as one of the ones that they wanted to talk about.
It's pretty tough to not argue there's an agenda when this is what they go with.
Exactly. That's why it was vitally important that we talk about this one.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed at our Supreme Court for even listening to arguments on this case. It's that bad.
Right. And it's like, if you actually look at the case, it is just gay people trying to exist. And when you look at a lot of these anti-LGBT laws or anti-trans laws, it is just people trying to live and maybe get married. And it's like, it's always framed as if they have this like agenda, like they want to take over the country, the LGBT people.
Indoctrination. Yeah. You got to throw that in there
it's
too.
A bunch of baloney, man. Like it's these people are just trying to live and be treated fair and equally, but that's just not allowed.
No, and the worst part is the state itself had already passed legislation that prevented this.
Right. So move.
Now, the problem that I have, I have several problems with this. The other problem that I have here is this Constitution says any laws that the Constitution does not explicitly cover fall to states' rights.
Yep.
There's no anti-discrimination law in the Constitution. So therefore, if the state has a law that governs it, the state should take precedent. The Supreme Court should have had no jurisdiction over this case whatsoever because of that law that was on the books.
Yeah, should have been done right then and there.
So it should have never even gotten to the Supreme Court.
But when you can politicize anything and you can make an agenda out of it, because now it becomes an issue of the First Amendment, which isn't that the one about free speech?
Free speech and freedom of religion.
Yeah. So, but like it's...
So how does her freedom of religion trump the other people's free speech by having a website?
Right.
Someone needs to explain that one too.
Yeah. Yep. It's pretty tough. No matter what side of the spectrum you're on politically, it's pretty tough to argue that there is not an agenda here. Especially this, it's good we ended with this, because this is like the standout.
It's the smoking gun.
Yeah.
You know, not only is it an agenda, It's a poorly thought out, poorly researched, and poorly executed agenda.
And a hateful one.
Yeah, and it's blatant. Like, it's like the expectation that Americans are stupid is written into this agenda, because you're not supposed to see this stuff. You're not supposed to pay attention to it. Supreme Court rule. They're supreme, so it should be okay, right? Only we're overturning other Supreme Courts, so it's really not supreme. It's kind of the okay court now.
Yeah.
Just do as we say, though. That's the hypocrisy that our country is dealing with today.
Yeah, and it goes back to that. We talked about the feeling of regression and the feeling of legalized discrimination. And again, we mentioned this a lot. But if you're an audio listener, we're two white guys, so
right.
It's really not impacting us that much. I can't imagine what it must be like being a transgender person or a member of the LGBT community or a minority or a woman. Like, there's just so many people out there that are, and I'm not laughing. I'm laughing because it is so horrible, right? I'm not laughing to make light of it.
Right.
I'm laughing because it is just, it's really bad.
And that's like, it's literally so bad that you don't need to be a member of the community to see how blatant this is and how wrong it is. That's how bad it is at this point.
And it's not even hidden. And then they have the Republican side of this. They tend to like put the blame on the other side of like, oh, well, they're the ones that are trying to take all the power. They're the ones that are actually trying to brainwash you. When in reality, that's just not true.
Right.
It could be in some way, but not nearly as much as the right is doing.
Right.
I just don't know how you can see that and just act like, if you believe in these far right conservative Christian ideas that like, that you're the minority in this. Like,
So I'm going to get insulting here for a second because I just can't make my point without being insulting. So the people that are doing this, the far right politicians and radicals that are doing this, are so blatant and so callous and not well thought out that their argument requires stupidity to believe, are doing that because the vast majority of people that support right-wing politics are stupid. They're people who don't want to think for themselves, don't want to do their own research, blindly want to follow somebody who they think is the next coming of Jesus, and generally are religious fanatics.
But they think that they are smart because they have backing like this where they're being legitimized.
They think they're smart because the people that know they're stupid keep telling them they're smart.
Yep,
Okay.
and that they have all the answers. You have to. I hear this a lot with what I do for a living. Okay, they say, oh, you can't trust the Democrats, you can't trust the liberals. They're trying to brainwash you, but you can trust me. Right. I have all the answers, and I'm like, you are no different than if they actually are brainwashing you on the left, because you're doing the exact same thing. You're delegitimizing everything else, but you're saying you have to listen to me. I have all the answers. You can trust me.
Right. They can't provide proof or evidence or a logical argument, so their way of arguing their point is to attack the legitimacy of the other guy.
And it's working.
It's fake news. Don't listen to it. It's political sabotage. It's a witch hunt. It's never me.
Right.
You've got a former president of the United States with like 50 indictments against him right now.
And he said he's going to run from jail.
And it's not him. It's everybody else.
And it works.
But it doesn't take a genius. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to look at this and say, you're delusional.
Yeah.
Like it can't be that.
Yeah.
But the problem is their supporters don't see logic.
And though it's like when, we talked about earlier when we got on our little aside about voting, right? The types of voters, the people that will vote on party lines. And now you have that with this far right, that they're going to vote like, when Trump said he could shoot somebody and get away with it, he was right.
Right.
Like,
exactly. He literally got up on national television and bragged about inappropriately groping a woman.
And then got elected.
And got elected president. They'll vote for him no matter what.
And then they'll do it out of spite.
He gets indicted for violating espionage laws. And he gets $1 million in donations the next day. He gets indicted. Did he get indicted yet for the other one?
I have no idea. We can do another episode on that.
There's so many indictments. It's hard to keep score at this point.
Yeah.
But every time he does something wrong, he gets more supporters.
And if he does go to prison for something, I think it will guarantee that he gets elected. Like it's like the kingpin.
Well, fortunately, there's 2 indictments he's under that if he gets elected, if he gets convicted, he cannot hold public office.
Oh.
Well,
then the Supreme Court will just say that,
then the Supreme Court will reinterpret the Constitution,
Exactly.
I'm sure. So anyway, that's where we're at.
That's the show.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, we don't even have to summarize. It's literally that bad at this point. Before we do go, though, I want to take a moment to push the right button here, which I just did, and invite you to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already do so. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video and audio versions of all of our network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. We're available on Pandora, Castro, Podbean, Buzzsprout, pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast these days, but not Stitcher soon. So Stitcher's going away.
Rest in peace, Stitcher.
I would also invite you to contact us. Tell us how we're doing. Argue with us. Tell us we're wrong, that we don't know what we're talking about. I'm take anything at this point in time.
The liberal check is in the mail.
You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. We're on Twitter at insights_things. You can find us on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings 5 days a week. If you have an Amazon Prime subscription, you do get a free monthly Twitch Prime. Throw that our way. We'd appreciate that. Or you can get links to all these and more on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. That's it. Another one in the books.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Your hosts, Joseph and Michelle Whalen, a husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics, are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom.
Welcome to that sudden intro to Insights into Entertainment, episode 151, Indy Strikes Back, the Disney Fire Sale. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my rested and relaxed co-host, Michelle Whalen. I don't think I changed that from the last one.
I don't think so. I think you kind of left it.
Because you were very busy today. I don't think you're rested and relaxed.
No, I am not.
How you doing today, dear?
I am doing well. How are you?
Doing okay. So we finally, we had some, I guess, entertainment news that was worthy of talking about.
True.
Anything else exciting happened since our last podcast?
I can't think of anything. I don't even remember.
Yeah, well, it was only a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it
wasn't
that long ago. No, I don't think anything
I
really.
think things have been kind of tame.
Yeah,
So
they normally are for us. So
usually, thankfully.
we're not at Comic-Con this week.
That's
San
true.
Diego.
That,
so.
yeah, we didn't go out to San Diego for that. We don't have any conventions coming up anytime soon, do we?
No, because the last one, Fan Expo, we actually decided not to go to.
Yeah.
So I think the next one coming up is, I think there was a ZoloCon fall thing, and then RetroCon is the one that comes in September. So I don't think there's anything in the summer lineup for us.
Interesting. That's usually our season too to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, when a good one comes around, we'll cover it for everyone.
Absolutely.
So with the writers and actors on strike, box office numbers struggling to rebound after the pandemic, and missteps from streaming costing studios billions, what could Hollywood possibly do to save the day? Maybe have a fire sale. Make some money, or at least that's what Bob Iger's looking to do. But before we see our heroes on the picket lines or unemployment lines, we first saw them on the silver screen in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And we've got our thoughts on that and more coming up on this episode of Insights into Entertainment. But first, I'd like to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Entertainment. You can find audio and video versions of all of our podcasts listed as Insights into Things, and we're available anywhere you get a podcast: Google, Stitcher, Podbean, Pandora, wherever. I'd also invite you to write in, give us your feedback, tell us how we're doing, give us suggestions on what you'd like us to cover. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can catch us on Twitter at insights_things, or you can find links to all that and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Are we ready?
Sure.
Let's do it. So, how not to handle a strike? So, everyone knows that the actors and the writers are on strike right now. It's kind of hard to miss the talent strikes happening across the entire entertainment industry at the moment. First, the Writers Guild of America went on strike in the name of fair wages and protections against AI encroachment, which I thought was kind of interesting. We didn't think AI was going to be destroying the world
soon.
through that method.
Right.
And then just recently, the Screen Actors Guild Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, SAG-AFTRA. Boy, that just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it?
Sure does.
They joined them shortly afterward on the picket line. So who are they fighting? So they're fighting the Hollywood studios, represented by the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. The producers are the bad guys, depending on your point of view, I guess.
In most cases, yeah.
So what's particularly curious about all this is how the Hollywood studios seemed to invite a strike, and then once they got one, they did everything in their power to inflame it even further. So this spring, it seemed like some Hollywood studios were actively itching for a writer's strike. Speculation about why exactly ran the gamut. Maybe it was to save a little money in the short run on shows the Writers Guild were part of. But more obviously, it might be to secure the least costly compromise on issues like residuals and transparency about viewership.
So, as discussions broke down between the two parties and the SAG-AFTRA representatives, we're seeing a majority of their demands rejected despite a nearly unanimous strike vote. A Deadline story quoted unnamed executives detailing a strategy to bleed striking writers until they came crawling back. Further inflaming the issue were comments from well-known Hollywood executive Bob Iger of Disney saying, "There's a level of expectation that they have that is just not realistic, and they are adding to the set of the challenges that this business is already facing that is, quite frankly, very disruptive." Iger may have succeeded in looking like a cool, calm, and collected voice of the studio, but he actually opened a can of worms that simply egged on the SAG-AFTRA president, Fran Drescher. Her response was one that was up there with a battle cry, motivational speeches like that of which Hollywood has historically been known for. "We are the victims here," she said, marking the start of the actor strike. We are being victimized by the very greedy entity. I am shocked by the way the people that have been in this business are treating us. I cannot believe it. quite frankly, how far apart we are on so many things. How they plead poverty, that they're losing money left and right, then giving hundreds of millions of dollars to their CEOs. It's disgusting. Shame on them. They stay on. And this was a very funny meme that kind of popped up where, the woman we all thought would lead the rebellion against the machines and, the woman who actually ended up leading the rebellion against, the machines.
That is very funny.
Yeah. So Barry Diller, who is the chairman and senior executive of IAC and Expedia Group, and a former Hollywood chief, suggested that the studio executives and top earning actors take a 25% pay cut to bring a quick end to the strike and help prevent the collapse of the entire industry. It's worth noting that at this time, the motion picture industry is still struggling to recover its box office numbers, which are nearly half of what they were pre-pandemic. It's also worth noting that in their haste to capitalize on the streaming bandwagon, many companies are in the red. Disney, Peacock, Paramount Plus, HBO Max, Discovery Plus have reportedly lost a combined $18 billion since 2020, which begs the question, can either side in this strike really afford it?
Yeah, I think that the sad thing here is obviously the fans are the ones that are going to be losing out.
Right.
In general.
Right.
The last time we had this, was it back in the 20-aughts or whatever when the last strike was, we wound up getting a rash of reality TV.
Well, and the one, I guess, positive is there's been such an influx between all of the different streaming services that have so much original content that's already there. So if nothing were to come back for a little while, there's plenty out there. It's just that you're not going to get anything new. So anything that people are waiting for, like a new season of Stranger Things or new things, that are on regular broadcast television, that's what's going to hurt. Whereas, somebody like a Netflix or, all of these other streaming services, they're probably not really going to be hurting because there's so much content that probably the average person hasn't gone through everything in the catalog yet.
Well, and that's also a good point because even Disney's getting to the point where their exclusive streaming content they're going to be releasing on network television. They have already announced they're releasing the Ms. Marvel series.
Right.
That was never intended to come out on network television.
Right. And I think there was something else from HBO that was going to be released on, so that's how they're kind of balancing, okay, well, we have enough on our streaming, but what are we going to do on broadcast? Okay, well, now we'll start doing a little bit of this to make it happen.
So, of course, inflaming all this is the wage disparity between executives and the actors and writers who make up the union workforces on strike. So just to put this into perspective, the average pay for top Hollywood executives climbed an average of 53% from 2018 to 2021, up to $28 million annually. And to put that further into perspective, you've got Bob Iger of Disney, who makes $31 million. Of course, he just renegotiated, so he's going to be making $1 million, but his incentives put him back up into the 20s. You have David Zaslav of Warner Brothers, who is compensated $39.3 million. Ted Sarandos of Netflix gets $50.3 million a year. Brian Roberts of Comcast is $32.1. Bob Bakish of Paramount is $32. And you have Tim Cook from Apple at the top at $99.4 million. Now, granted, Tim Cook, Apple does more than just streaming.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So there's a lot more going on there. So you could probably take, 60% of that out and he'd still be in that third of the $40 million just for the streaming side of things.
Right.
So to contrast that, we take a look at the Writers Guild of America, and what their average writers make per year is about $250,000.
And that's probably on the high end for...
That's average. That's what your average writer makes. And your average SAG-AFTRA actor makes about $40,000. That's what blew my mind. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, that average is low because you have the top 1% talent.
Right, that make $10 million a movie or something. Yeah.
Well, more than that.
Well, yeah.
So taking a look at the top talent, you've got Tom Cruise, who in 2023, which is about half over, has taken in over $100 million. You have Will Smith, who took in $35 million just for his Apple TV Plus show, Emancipation. Now, that's a real slap in the face.
That was funny.
You have Leonardo DiCaprio, who brings in $30 million or more per project, as does Brad Pitt. You have Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who routinely brings in $20 million per project. Now, I'd certainly like to smell what The Rock is smelling compensation-wise. Even Will Ferrell, who I'm not a big fan of him, I know a lot of people like him and think he's funny, he demands about $20 million per project as well. So the 1% of the club, really, they're the bulk of the actors that are involved here. Your extras, your bit parts, your character actors, the people that aren't your big Hollywood stars, they make up the bulk of the union.
Right.
And they're making an average of $40,000 a year.
Well, and some of them aren't even making that because in order to get benefits through the union, you have to be making a minimum of $24,000 a year. And there are so many
and I agree.
that
That's
aren't
why
even
these numbers are average
making
numbers.
that. Right.
So obviously,
no, I get it.
You got people making more, you got people making less.
And there was actually, something that I saw that said where you had about, if they took 25% off the top, and there was something that I saw that even said 2% of the top executive salaries. So 2% would be like nothing. Nobody would notice, but basically everybody that's in the union would be able to get coverage because of just that 2% off the top for everybody. Right. Now, what is interesting was I just saw briefly an article I didn't read fully, but there's one of the movie studios, A24, that they actually met all the negotiations. So anybody that's actually working with A24, with their production team, they're not striking because they said, okay, you want more money? Here's more money. The actors, you need more money. So they went, all of the demands that were asked for between the actors and the writers, they met them. So those people are working.
Right.
So,
So the vast majority of Hollywood really is made up of starving actors who live paycheck to paycheck.
Yep.
Now, being the person that I am, I want to ask the question, why not just go get a real job if you're not making it in acting? I understand that's a lot of people's dream.
Right.
But if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you can't make ends meet, maybe it's time to go get another job somewhere.
And in a lot of cases, they do have other jobs. They are doing other things. So.
Have you ever considered a career in truck driving? And I don't mean to sound callous about it, but if you're not, like, if I wanted to be a doctor and I'm a failed doctor and I can't do it, I'm not going to keep trying to be a doctor. I'm going to go do something else.
Right.
And in this case, it's the industry. The industry's not treating you right. If I work for a company and that company mistreats me, doesn't compensate me fairly for my work, doesn't provide benefits, I'm going to leave and go somewhere else and do something else.
I know. And many people do. And you see that time and time again where, unfortunately, the paparazzi are now, in the age that we're in, that everybody has a camera on their phone. Someone will go to the grocery store and, hey, aren't you, so-and-so? You used to be on television. Now you're bagging groceries. And you get belittled for going and earning an honest living and doing that in some cases.
And you know what? That stems from caring what other people think.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where I think a lot of people, they try and, okay, well, if I can't be on the screen, let me see if I can do behind the scenes and do something. So you see that too, where people try and, get into production or set design or something to kind of...
Or you turn into Kevin Sorbo and you just troll people on Twitter when you're not a successful actor.
Yeah, that too. So
really what the strike boils down to is two things. One, it's salaries. Mm-hmm. Really, it's three things. It's salaries, because of the disparity between, and I don't know why you would pick on CEOs. I think the problem you have is that when you compare yourself to a CEO and you're an actor, the value that you lend to the franchise at that point in time is on a completely different measuring scale than what the CEO or what the executives bring. It's like you're comparing apples and oranges. So I think that's a problem right there, that you're comparing yourself to that. The other one that they have is residuals from streaming.
Right.
So the problem that you run into here is traditionally the studios are usually 2 or 3 steps behind technology. You know,
Right.
They missed the ball on VHS and got screwed on that. They missed the ball on DVDs because they tried to encrypt them and they got screwed on that. So they kind of got out. This is the first time in decades that they got out ahead of things. And they got into streaming, and it was supposedly successful, even though they're $18 billion in the hole because they invested so much money in it. And the problem that you have is the previous contracts didn't... Streaming exploded so quickly,
Right.
you couldn't have it in a contract before.
Well, and really it was because of the pandemic, because everything really changed in some respects. For
Yes
that.
and no. I mean, Netflix was a streaming juggernaut well before the pandemic.
Right.
Everybody saw that
Right.
and was shocked that Netflix, because everyone had their content on Netflix.
True.
Everybody was shocked at how well Netflix did. And Netflix did so well because they just poured money hand over fist into original content.
Right.
They were in the red for years producing content
Right.
just to get it out there and get subscribers in. So you had technology explode, and the industry's trying to catch up to it now. You're also dealing with the industry at a very fragile state now. Your ticket sales, your box office ticket sales are about 50% what they were pre-pandemic. You've got streaming services that are hemorrhaging money to the point that they're pulling back on projects now because they can't afford to keep making new content. So to strike now, when the industry is at its weakest, to a certain extent, I think Iger's right in that it's a really bad time to do this because you're really going to hurt the industry. What's going to happen here is they'll resolve this strike, obviously, at some point in time. But how many people are going to be out of a job because you're going to have studios that are cutting budgets back because of the losses they're already incurring, plus the losses that they're incurring because of the strike? So you may see as much, I've seen speculation up to a 30% cut in the workforce in the industry. Is that really the union benefiting its employees at that point in time? Where, okay, you can get your 20% raise, but you're out of a job now. Good luck finding a job at that rate.
Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword. And then finally, the third one they're complaining about is AI. Now, AI, there's a couple of different aspects of AI. One is the writing. You know, you can go out and have some AI system write a script for you. The AI that's out there today isn't good enough to write a Hollywood script
Right.
because all it does is it parrots what's out there already.
Right.
So you're not going to, it's good to help supplement or to start or whatever. It's not going to replace writers.
Right.
So that's an irrational fear right now. The other fear is deepfakes,
Right.
where you've got industries where you can produce somebody else's likeness. Well, there's already laws for that. You don't need to have something in your contract. If somebody uses your likeness, like you can't make Indiana Jones without Harrison Ford.
Right.
You can digitally reproduce them, and they did. They de-aged him and they digitally reproduced them. But if they did that without Harrison Ford's permission and involvement, he would have sued them.
Well, and I think that's what a lot of these background actors are concerned about who are on that bottom level is that they're going to go in and do something, and there's going to be something in the contract saying, oh, we now own your likeness, and it's going to be, hidden somewhere.
And then they can still do that. There's nothing that says they can't do that. So you need to have an agent that's going to read your contract.
That's the thing, is that they're trying to protect, to make sure that's not something that's added on, because it's now so easy to do.
But that's not something you can expect to use as a bargaining chip in a negotiation for a strike. That's something that's a negotiating point when you negotiate your contract. Mm-hmm. So make sure that your agent and your lawyer know how to read a contract.
Right.
So I'm kind of hesitant on giving them credit for that one here, but salary-wise, I'll totally give you that. Streaming, we covered the what was the one with her studio where Disney didn't want to pay her?
Scarlett Johansson.
Scarlett Johansson,
that
yes.
was the kind of the start of everything.
Right. So Disney basically engaged in a contract with her that said they'd pay her a certain percent for ticket sales at the box office.
Right.
Then the pandemic hit, and they released it streaming.
Right.
And they said, but we don't have an agreement on streaming. And they pretended as though they could just do whatever they wanted with it at that point in time.
Right.
When in reality, you didn't have an agreement for streaming. Mm-hmm. So you legally have no rights to stream it. It's not that you don't have to pay me for it.
Right.
So they wound up settling that out of court, though. But that's another, instance of how streaming, it's so new that the industry it's falling over itself now to try to figure out what to do with it.
Right.
So anyway, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about Disney's fire sale. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
So welcome back, everyone. So, how much would Disney go for in a fire sale? Probably outside of our price range. But in a recent interview for Squawk Box, conducted by David Faber, held at a media conference in Sun Valley, Idaho, Iger's made some volatile comments he's since been trying to walk back from. The initial questions revolved around the impact of the writers and the actors' strike, but quickly moved to business matters that may have revealed more information than Iger was originally intended to go public at the time. During the interview, he indicated that ABC and its local stations may not be core to the Walt Disney Company. The interviewer speculated about a possible sale, and Iger said, "We have to be open-minded and objective about the future of those businesses." Bloomberg reports that with cable television on the decline, Iger wants to sell most of Disney's TV assets, mainly ABC, Freeform, and FX.
Well, Bob Iger had made it clear that he's looking to sell some of the company's TV and streaming assets. Rumors have been swirling for months in the industry that Disney may even be considering selling the entire company. Disney streaming services have been losing money and subscribers. Disney lost 4 million subscribers last quarter. Streaming is expected to have hit a total loss of $800 million in the third quarter. According to Bloomberg, Iger wants to completely sell or restructure Disney's TV and streaming business in India, where Disney Plus has had its biggest losses. Disney Plus Hotstar, the region's version of Disney Plus, lost streaming rights to Indian Premier League cricket matches, leading to the service losing 3.8 million subscribers in quarter one and 4.6 million subscribers in quarter two. Despite the recent setbacks, Iger looks to double down on streaming with his plan to hold on to Hulu. Disney will launch a combined app for Hulu and Disney Plus later this year, though Disney will more than likely have to buy Comcast's 33% stake in Hulu in 2024.
So experts speculate that selling Disney's TV networks could get them about $8 billion, which could help offset the cost of that last third. Potential buyers would be financial entities like private equity firms. Iger also wants to hang on to ESPN, but is looking for a partner for a sports network. Potential partners include sports companies and Apple. Speaking of Apple, there have been rumors since Iger's return last November that he will sell all of Disney to the tech company. At the time, Iger called these rumors nothing more than speculation, but the sale still seems to be a possibility. Bob Iger isn't known for selling. During his first tenure as Disney CEO, he acquired Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilms, which have all proven successful purchases.
According to Bloomberg, TV generated 35% of Disney's revenue, about $24.8 billion, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and over 50%, $7.5 billion, of its operating income. Contrast that against the massive losses from streaming, and it's a bit of a head-scratcher as to why he'd want to keep the loser and sell the winner. Disney Plus was Iger's baby before he retired the first time around. Launched under his part-time successor, Bob Chapek, it met with initial success despite its surprisingly discounted monthly rate, but quickly started hemorrhaging subscribers, failing to offset the high costs of their premiere productions. It's also worth noting that Iger got his start not just in TV, but in ABC. When the Walt Disney Company acquired ABC in 1995, they acquired Iger, and he worked his way up to the CEO of the entire company over the next decade, finally landing the top spot in 2005 after Michael Eisner was ousted. Iger was CEO until retiring in 2020, but returned to the position in November 2022 after they kicked Bob Chapek back out. So, what do you think? Do you think selling it off piecemeal is worthwhile, or do you think they should sell the entire thing at one time?
I don't know. It's kind of interesting. So it kind of reminds me of the documentary that we watched on Marvel and the history of Marvel and how that went. And you kind of see how, okay, you had Marvel and they weren't doing well, so they sold this entity to this to this one, this to this one, and this to this one. And then while it worked for them, it kind of made a mess of things because you had this company that could do this and this company that could do this. But if you had this company that wanted to do something joint, they couldn't without trying to jump through hoops to pay all these other people. So if you were to do that, I could see that kind of happening with Disney, where certain things with Disney would succeed, and then I think certain things with Disney would kind of fall flat if you just kind of sold it off to the highest bidder, to do one or the other. ESPN, does that need to still be with Disney? I think ESPN could go anywhere. Like, there's not enough crossover with ESPN and anything else with Disney. Okay, so Disney, down in Orlando, they have the Wide World of Sports. That's really the only kind of tie-in between the two.
That was ABC, though.
Right. So, so I don't really see an issue if you said, okay, we're going to sell that part off to somebody else. The network TV stuff, I guess maybe you could kind of let that go to somebody else, because right now there's a partnership, because every now and then there'll be, a Disney movie or something. And then, of course, they tried with the whole Disney Plus thing with Dancing with the Stars. The last season of it, instead of putting it on network television, they only had it streaming on Disney Plus, and they saw their numbers go down. So what are they doing this season? It's going to be back, on regular television, and then they'll, put the episodes on Disney Plus after the fact. So, kind of going back to how they were. So, I don't know. It's kind of a mixed bag. I obviously I don't want Apple to buy them just because I'm anti-Apple, but that's just me. But then again, maybe, Apple getting into it, maybe we'd see things get updated in the parks and things like that haven't, that have been neglected over the years. So I don't know. I'm kind of...
Well, and I think you raise a couple of very good points. One being the things that he seems to want to hold on to are the ones that are the most logical to get rid of. Mm-hmm. And the ones he's saying he wants to get rid of are the money makers that are the most logical ones to hold on to. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, ESPN can be parceled off and sold off either on its own or to somebody else and have zero effect on Disney whatsoever. Nothing is tied to ESPN. Why Disney even has it still is amazing to me. But ABC, Disney has been, ABC has been their premier broadcast network for decades now. Mm-hmm. It's been there for special events. It's been there for special releases. It doesn't make sense, especially considering it's making money. And it's making a lot of money, apparently. So why would you get rid of that? So these statements from him almost seem like false flags to me. Like he's throwing stuff out there. He's testing the waters and seeing what kind of reaction he's going to get. Is somebody going to make him an offer? What kind of offer are they going to make? He's also not talking about selling off anything other than streaming and television right now.
Right.
So you've got production studios. You've got all your intellectual property that he's still holding on to and not talking about selling. You've got your parks that he's got that he's not talking about. So I think what they're running into is streaming. They went about it wrong. Mm-hmm. When they went into streaming, they went into it, unlike everything else Disney does, they went into it on the cheap.
Right.
The price that they released their streaming service at was a fraction, literally 50% off of what every other streaming service was. And the production value that they were putting into it, which shows like The Mandalorian and everything else, they were spending a fortune on. They were making essentially feature-length movies in each of those episodes and spending a lot of money on
it. Yeah.
So it almost sounds like it's a little bit of regret on how they launched their streaming. But I think it's almost him trying to shake up the industry, try to shake up the executives at Disney to realize that there's a awakening coming and something has to give. He's not going to be there that much longer.
Right.
I don't think there's enough time for him to start selling off assets.
Right.
Even with the contract extension he just got. So I think what he's really trying to do, since he renegotiated his contract and he's looking for the incentive bonuses, is he's trying to kick people in the pants and get them moving to get some money so that he can get his bonuses.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if they sold off anything in the next 2 to 3 years. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's, again, testing the waters, seeing what's out there, seeing, like, hey, I might be interested in selling, the Louvre, and, how much are you going to give me for it? How much is it worth to you? And kind of seeing, okay, where's that going to put me at the end of the deal?
Well, and that's the thing. Like, so if somebody comes in and starts speculating and saying, I'm going to give you $5 billion for ABC, you have any idea what that's going to do to their stock price? And all he's trying to do is boost the stock price. If he can do it by, basically doing what Elon Musk does, going out there saying stupid stuff to change your stock price.
Right.
That works too, as long as the stock price goes up and it stays there.
Yeah.
If he, I think he's trying to generate this idea of value. Like, I know what we have is valuable. I want somebody else to tell me how valuable it is and tell the rest of the world.
Right.
So that people realize how valuable we are.
Sure.
So I think it's a lot of bluster right now.
I could
But
see that.
I'll be honest with you, I'm an Apple person. I don't want to see Apple acquire Disney either, but that's just me. So anyway, we're going to take our second break and we'll be back with our review of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
So Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I'll give you my take on it first, and then you can give yours. So I went out and did a little bit of research to see what the critics said, and RogerEbert.com's review of the movie hit the nail on the head, where they described it as never boring but never really entertaining at the same time. Overall, it was at about the level of a streaming miniseries that's probably where it would have been best showcased. It wasn't worth a big screen adventure, and it certainly wasn't worthy of capping off such an illustrious series. But that phrase, in fact, I think, has to be drawn into question. When only 2 of the 5 movies in the franchise are illustrious and exceptional, should we really be looking back so fondly on the Indiana Jones franchise as we do? I think it's more nostalgia than anything else. But let's take a deeper look at the movie, without giving away too many spoilers. So hands down, and we'll take a look at the series real quick too. So hands down, the best movie in the series was Raiders of the Lost Ark. It lit the spark for the franchise, and it reinvigorated the entire movie genre going forward. When we get to the Temple of Doom, it's a mediocre showing with a weak cast, limited sets, lackluster special effects, and an uninteresting story. But it was a sequel, so expectations were low. We get to The Last Crusade, and it was an absolute masterpiece and dispelled any doubts about sequels being subpar. It recaptured the original spirit of Raiders, and it gave us what we thought would be, at that time, a fitting end to the saga. Especially the name, Last Crusade. That would have worked. Then we get to Crystal Skull, a movie that had such potential, so many opportunities to do the right thing, and seemed so deliberately self-sabotaging to make us cringe at the thought of watching it again. Because I did. I sat down and watched them all with our daughter because she hadn't seen them all. The Dial of Destiny. See, it's not even a memorable title. The Dial of Destiny falls somewhere between Crystal Skull and Temple of Doom. It wants to be a classic indie adventure, but lacks the inspiration. Much like the previous failed movies, the object of the adventure is a weak plot point pulled from a known existing museum piece, combined with a plot that pushes it beyond the realm of believability. And that's where the movie loses me and so many other fans, is they push it to the point of ludicrousness. And it was just flat. It had no emotion. It had no oomph. It felt old and tired and weak. I mean, granted, Harrison Ford's like 97 now or something like that.
81.
There's only so much oomph you can get from the man at this point in time.
But for 80 years old, he's not sitting in a nursing home, drooling in a corner. So you gotta kind of give him, credit for that, I guess.
So what are your thoughts?
Okay, so I don't know. I think I'm kind of in the same boat as you. It was, it definitely wasn't one of the better, but it definitely wasn't at the bottom where, Crystal Skull was. I know when we went and saw that in the theater, we kind of left the theater going, really? That's where you went with it? Like, okay. So, so going into this, it was like, okay, they have to do something better. And they did. So it was definitely better. And again, interesting little plot twist that you kind of have going on with it. Again, was it realistic? Well, some of the stuff that happened in Raiders really wasn't realistic. It was supernaturally. So you can kind of go, okay, every movie kind of has that aspect of some, make-believe magic thing, going on. There were some touching moments. There were some sad moments of it. The one thing was like everybody that Indy is meeting up with is getting killed off. You have somebody you're like, yeah, I'm going to help you. But, oh, you're dead. Oh, I'm going to help you. Oh, you're dead. It's like, nobody help him. You're going to die. Haven't you learned your lesson? So that was kind of interesting. The bad guy is a bad guy, but he's trying to make things better for bad guys is really what it comes down to, and the little things that go back and forth. But yeah, in some cases it kind of felt flat, but he's also 80 years old. So yeah, the fact that he's kind of tired, and the one premise behind it is he's getting ready to finally retire from teaching. And it's like, great, now I can't retire because now I got to go across the world and try and look for this last, adventure. So it was, again, it was definitely, it kept moving. There weren't too many slow parts, but like, they had said in the review, it was like, okay, there was so much going on, but yet nothing was going on. Like, did you need to have all of that?
Right. It was just make busy stuff.
Right.
It didn't drive a plot or anything.
Right.
I mean,
right.
They would have been better off calling it Indiana Jones and the Search for Social Security. I mean, that's really what it felt like.
Yeah.
It's like, I got nothing out of it. Like, I walked out of there thinking, oh, okay, well, let's watch the next episode next week. And it almost felt like it's a serial that left it hanging.
Yeah.
Like, and it's supposed to be the last one.
Right.
So I think the series would have done so much better had they just not done the last two movies and ended it with Last Crusade.
Last Crusade. No, I could totally agree.
I would have been perfectly fine with it. But to my point, you've got 5 movies in this series, and only 2 of them are good. Is it really a great series at that point? I mean, yeah, if you're a baseball player, you're batting .250 at that point. Like, it's not incredible. I can't get excited about that at this point. And it's almost like they're doing a discredit to the franchise. Like Crystal Skull was just abysmal.
Well, it's kind of funny if you go to Hollywood Studios in Disney and they have the Indiana Jones stunt show, it's all stuff based on Raiders of the Lost Ark. They've never incorporated, with all of these other movies, they've never changed the script to match, where other theme park things, you have, Pirates of the Caribbean, that they made a movie based on the ride, so then they went back and added aspects of the movie to the ride, and every time a new movie came out, they would change the ride, where here you have something where, nope, this is the only thing that we've done, and that's what we leave it at.
It's almost like they made the movie because they couldn't end the franchise on Crystal Skull because it was so bad. So I think they thought it would be successful as long as it wasn't as bad as Crystal Skull. And it wasn't.
And it wasn't.
So I think it's mission accomplished for them.
Right. Well,
the movie didn't need to be made.
I think it would have been better off if they had done it like a streaming,
Yeah.
a six-part episode.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
think
how you would have,
That would have worked just fine.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I wouldn't go and pay for it knowing what I know now. I'd wait for it to come out on streaming. That's just me.
And kind of going, leading back to where everything was. Now you're seeing movies that they're only out in the theater for 3 months and then they're available to stream. So a lot of people,
Which is another reason why Disney's losing money on
right,
streaming.
and that's kind of going back to, so people are like, well, why should I go to the movie theater when I'll be able to just watch it in my home, and I'll be able to pause it and get a drink and a snack. And, if something comes up, I can finish the movie tomorrow. I don't have to sit and waste, 3
again,
hours.
That's a reflection of them not knowing what to do with the new technology.
Right.
And they're basically abusing themselves with this technology because they don't know how to use it.
Right.
So I think that was all we had today.
Yep.
Before we go, I do want to once again invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Entertainment. You can find audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, etc., etc. I would also invite you to write in and give us your feedback. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com.
You can find us on Twitter at insights_things.
We do stream 5 days a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings.
You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast.
We stream 5 days a week on YouTube at youtube.com/insightsintothings.
You can find us on Instagram at insightsintothings.
And you can find all that and much more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. And that's it. Another one in the books.
Have a good week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Your hosts are Joseph and Madison Whalen, a father and daughter team making their way through the challenges of the teenage years.
Welcome to Insights into Teens. This is episode 179, Fighting in School. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my calm and collected co-host, Madison Whalen.
Hey, everybody.
How you doing today, Maddie?
Doing all right. How about you?
Doing okay. So this is the last in our, controversial series that we were doing.
Series.
Little bit more light than I think last week. Last week we were kind of somber and serious, but for good reason. So we are back this week with something a little bit more lightweight, but no less, controversial.
And impactful, I'd say.
And definitely impactful. Before we get into all that, anything exciting happened to you this week?
Not
No.
entirely.
Well, a little controversy about your school schedule that we have to sort out still.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, school's starting, so that's fun.
That's exciting. Is that starting next week?
Yep, Thursday.
Wow, that's some exciting stuff there.
Yeah.
Your enthusiasm is just overwhelming.
Yeah, considering how it's going so far, or how I think it's going to go, it's like, yeah,
Well,
great.
we will make the best of it. So, in light of you going back to school next week, we have been holding on to this topic for a while now. We'd actually done the research and prep for it before summer, actually, before school let out. But we just sort of never got to it in the series before school let out, and seemed kind of silly talking about fighting in school in the middle of summer.
Yeah.
So it was kind of out of context. So I wanted to wait until we were closer to school. So on this episode of Insights into Teens, we delve into the hidden layers of school violence. Beyond the shocking headlines lie the pervasive issues of bullying, insecurity, and Star Wars music in the background from our video game.
Yep.
We'll discuss the often overlooked factors that contribute to this critical problem. We'll explore its impact on students, teachers, and others. And we'll uncover strategies to effectively address and prevent school violence. But, as always, before we get to that, I wanted to once again invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Teens. You can find audio and video versions of all of the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. And we're pretty much anywhere you get a podcast these days. Apple, Spotify, Google, not Stitcher because they're going away at the end of the month, which is tomorrow, I think. But anyway, you know where to get our podcast at this point. I would also invite you to write in and give us your feedback. I mean, we talked about some pretty hard-hitting, controversial, spirited topics over the last 9 episodes or so. I'd love to get people's feedback on them. And just let us know other stuff you'd like us to talk about. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can hit us up on Twitter or X or whatever Elon's calling it this week. We're at insights_things. Or you can get links to all that and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Shall we get started?
Yes.
Here we go. So what is school violence? So our initial research we took from verywellmind.com, a site we use quite frequently. They tell us that school violence isn't confined to the dramatic headlines. It's a pervasive issue that affects 246 million children annually. This problem isn't gender neutral either, as girls and gender non-conforming individuals bear a disproportionate brunt of it. Within the educational sphere, violence takes on various forms, with fellow students being the primary perpetrators. It spans verbal, sexual, and physical realms, sometimes involving weapons, but not exclusively. Acts that leave someone feeling threatened or harmed, regardless of the method, fall under this umbrella.
Defining school violence involves recognizing its occurrence in the school setting. It's not just a specific type of violence, but describes acts that disturb learning and harm students, schools, and the community at large. Examples of this encompass bullying, cyberbullying, fights, weapon use, gang-related incidents, and sexual violence. The locations where these events unfold include school property, the journey to and from school, during school-sponsored events, and even on the way to or from such events.
So, what really prompted this a few months back to talk about this topic was there were a number of fights that you were coming home and telling us about, none of which you were involved in, obviously.
Yeah.
But they were fights that had some kind of effect on you, whether it was delaying you getting to school or a fear for your own safety or whatnot. Have you noticed an increase in violence or fights in schools recently, or is it kind of been at the same level since you've been going to school?
Well, I definitely started to see an increase as, I got older, because, when it came to, elementary school, you never really saw like fist fights or like aggressive fights to where like teachers had to get involved. However, I technically heard about my first fight in 6th grade, and ever since then, fights tended to get like more rampant. And some of the more quote unquote memorable fights I've seen included those when I've been in high school.
Okay. Now, one of the things that they talk about here is there's a high percentage of incidents in which individuals involved in these fights, at least in the survey goes,